we raised almost $50 million and I'm not kidding. From the time that the idea came out, it was only a week until the bid. So $50 million sprang up out of nowhere, basically through a crowd raise that we organized.
Hello, everyone. This is the Space Cafe podcast, and I'm Marcus. So what if the future of space wasn't run by governments or billionaires, but by all of us? We're standing at the edge of a new space age, but who gets to decide how we explore, who gets access, and what kind of societies we build beyond Earth? For centuries, power has been centralized. Nations, corporations, institutions, all defining the rules of engagement. But what happens when technology allows us to govern ourselves beyond borders, beyond politics, beyond Earth? Enter MoonDAO, a radical experiment in decentralized space exploration. They've already crowdfunded a spaceflight, and now they're thinking even bigger, a blockchain-powered, self-governing lunar economy. Is this the future of space, a wild west of decentralized pioneers, or the first real step toward an off-world democracy? Today I sit down with Pablo Moncada, a core mind behind MoonDAO, to explore the possibilities and the dangers of a world where blockchain meets space. And this is not just a conversation about technology, it's about power, ownership, and the future of humanity among the stars. Welcome, Pablo Moncada, to the Space Cafe podcast. And my friends, I took the liberty to add some 25 minutes to the beginning to try to wrap my head around that damn blockchain, what it is. So I hope you excuse that. Have fun.
So, there's one other person with me in San Francisco. So we work together pretty often, but the rest of the team is distributed. So our group at MoonDAO, we have a core group. One person's in Canada, the other in Colombia, another in Chicago. But we normally just meet online. So we have a little, we use GatherTown, which I showed you a little bit before this. You're a little Pokemon character and you can move around and go into someone's desk. We have a virtual desk, virtual meeting rooms. Yeah, it's fun. I think it was developed during the pandemic and a few startups started to use it, but for a DAO like us, it's perfect. It's exactly what we need.
Tell us how that works. So you showed it to me. It looks like a top-down view on, I don't know, The Sims or something like this. How does that work? How does a meeting in a meeting room work as opposed to a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting?
Yeah, so your character, whenever it walks up to someone else, it automatically starts a video chat with them. Mm-hmm. And then there are other virtual rooms where you can set a time and then everyone shows up in the virtual room. And then, you have your meeting and then you walk back to your virtual desk, which you can customize. And yeah, it's just a nice way of developing that co-presence. So if you're working remotely, I think a lot of people can relate to this. It's like I don't know, it's like going to a library where you see other people working and makes you want to, be a little bit more focused. You're less distractible. So having everyone in one place, even though it's virtual, and you can see that they're all there, they're all working, you can walk up to anyone's desk whenever. It actually, I think, improves their productivity quite a bit.
Sounds super interesting, as opposed to just having video calls and then cutting off and never knowing where the other party is. So when you're idling or when you're having lunch or whatnot, you can actually see, or while working, you can actually see where the others are. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. And they can set their status. So if they, are going to, I don't know, go get groceries or something, you say, hey, I'll be back in an hour. And so you can kind of have these sort of asynchronous, you can have the benefits of both the synchronicity of the meetings, but then also knowing when, I know that I'm going to need to work with Marcus on a project later around 2-ish. You don't have to plan that time exactly. You just know that they're going to be there at their desk and you walk right up to them. So yeah, it's helpful.
It could be, if you extrapolate this into the future, in the very near future, just imagine walking, you're saying, hey, I'm heading out to Starbucks, can I get something? And then you can actually order me real coffee that will be delivered to my doorstep and wherever I live.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, and then a drone comes in.
Yeah,
Drops
totally.
it right for you.
We just learned from a guy, a photographer from Slovenia. He has been living in Shanghai for 10 years now. And I think from what he described, this is pretty much reality already in Shanghai, like all that drone delivery stuff and whatnot and online services. So I think we're not so far from that reality.
Right. Yeah. No. Things are speeding up so much. It's sometimes hard to keep pace with some of this stuff. But yeah, I think especially any sort of robotics that has an AI component, I think we'll start to see a ton of embodied AI. So all of these problems of like 6 degree of freedom movement for a drone or something like that, I think is relatively solved, and we'll probably see a lot of that replacing a ton of delivery, especially the like small package delivery. I think Amazon and Google, all of these companies have been working on it for a while, but they've been trying to make it profitable. And I think we'll probably get there soon. So who knows? The future is coming too fast sometimes, it feels like. Yeah.
Pablo, do you think that, going back to Gather Town, do you think this is a viable future scenario? Are we gravitating ever more in this direction, or is this just a hangout for nerds, like other nerd places where coders hang out?
Right. Yeah. There's a quote. I forget who said this. Maybe it's Tim Ferriss or someone who's like that what the nerds are doing on their weekends is, eventually what everyone will be doing, in a few years or something like that. Whatever the super nerds are doing on their nights and weekends, where they're just doing it for fun. And I think that the capital expenditure for a startup, especially when it's just getting off of the ground, to own an office or lease an office or anything like that, is basically gone away. And maybe that used to be, you'd meet at a library, or you used to, I don't know, go to some co-working place. But I think in a world where a lot of the talents are distributed in different parts of the world, then we'll probably see much more coalescing of these smaller efforts, these startups, these kind of projects that may not be a business, it might be something in between, that use these tools like GatherTown in order to coordinate a bit more. The difficulty, though, is still time zones. That's still a big pain in the ass. But other than that, I think it works pretty well.
Super interesting. We're here to talk about your core topic of interest, that is MoonDAO. That this is your company, your business, and this is all about building up a self-governed, internet-native, real-world world impact, global collaboration of humans to find new ways of cohabitation in political and social and forms on the moon, in outer space. So, and before we, because this is already crazy enough to jump in from any angle, but before we do so, the backbone of it all is the blockchain. And if I remember correct, the blockchain has, by the way, I'm hoping you will enlighten me today what the blockchain actually is, because I think I have forgotten over the years. And there's been some cycles with the blockchain, some cycles where it was present, it was very hyped, and then it got sort of from the public face, got lost, and now it's coming back again. So can you give us a quick overview? The blockchain obviously is not dead, but where is it right now? Because the public eye doesn't really see it at the moment, at least my public eye.
Right. So I can give the technical level. Well, maybe I can walk through some of the history of the blockchain and why it was developed and what the ideas behind it were, and then kind of see where we are today. So the original idea, or the original thing to solve, was this mechanism where you can have a peer-to-peer currency, peer-to-peer money. And the reason you might want this is that, currently, if you have money, digital money, say like the US dollar or the euro or something like that, this is actually mostly digital. So these currencies are already digital. You can think of them as a database that holds the amount of money that, different people have when one person transacts with someone else, and you add money to their account and then you subtract it from their account. And then there are various layers on top of that. So you have credit cards that kind of hold the point system, and they settle with the banks. And when you transfer money to another bank, they have their own system of matching their databases to make sure it's all consistent. And so that whole system is basically mediated by these entities where they can kind of they custody your funds. They can lend money from others. They receive money from a bigger bank or from the Federal Reserve. And so we kind of have to start peeling the layers off the onion to understand how money works. And it's quite a journey. But at the end of that journey is essentially there's a group called the Federal Reserve in the United States that controls the money supply. So they control the interest rates, and they can print more money, and that's what causes inflation. For example, if you have more of a money supply, then things start to cost more, etc. And around 2008, 2009, an anonymous individual, Satoshi Nakamoto is the name. He came up with a solution to a problem in computer science, which is called the Byzantine generals problem. And this was actually what was holding back this creation of digital money. And so you can think of this problem essentially as like you have a note, you have a memo, and you have to give it to another general, but you have to go through an enemy camp. And other people in the enemy camp can break your memo, they can write on it, and the other general on the other end needs to be able to verify that what they got was not tampered with. And the solution to this problem is essentially what's called the proof of work algorithm. And now I'm starting to get into the weeds, but essentially what this is every single person on Earth has a copy of the database, in this case, the ledger. And every time there's a transaction that someone does, everyone all over the world rushes to put that transaction in their ledger. They put together what's called a block. This is why it's called a blockchain. So they put together a list of many of these transactions, and then the protocol to put that together is known to everyone. Everyone's running the same software. And then when a block is formed, they use this algorithm that is what's called a one-way function. So the one-way function, and sorry, this is always getting into the weeds, but essentially what it is a very difficult problem. And people from all over the world have to spend energy to run basically almost like a random number generator to find solutions to this problem. And so everyone is rushing to find the solution. Whoever finds that solution gets a reward. And then they emit that solution to everyone else. Everyone else verifies the solution. And then that block is then put onto the blockchain. That's what it's called. Chain of blocks.
Any new blocks are just updated version of the state of the entire system.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And so this was an accounting system, and that was developed to essentially hold a point system between people. So how much of these Bitcoins does each of us have? And it sounds like maybe it wouldn't be that impactful, but really, if you look at the properties of what this new system has, it basically ensures that there's no intermediary, there's no central entity that can change the protocol without over 50% of all of the nodes in that system lying, essentially. If they wanted to say Marcus now has 1,000 Bitcoin because Marcus says so, you'd have to control 50% of the energy in this entire network, which is very difficult to do. And so this was kind of the breakthrough that allowed for a string of other. So they were able to extend that idea of just moving money around into a complete set of what you would need to do computation generally. So this is called so Turing had this idea for computation. So there's this Turing complete idea where you have a certain set of operations that you can mathematically prove that given this set of operations, you can calculate anything you want. And so at that point, people were able to develop what's called smart contracts or programs that run on this blockchain. And this was the innovation of Ethereum. So Ethereum made it so that anyone could program this blockchain and actually program a contract in between individuals. So now you've gone beyond just assigning point values to people without a single intermediary. Now you can actually run contracts. So you can have lending, you can have borrowing, you can have trading on a decentralized exchange. You could have DAOs, like these organizations that have no central intermediary would just run on the basis of different contracts. And so that's where
a DAO is a blockchain-based organization.
Yes. So
what does it stand for? DAO. What does that stand for?
It stands for a decentralized autonomous organization.
Okay.
And the big dream, and it hasn't quite been achieved yet, but the big dream is that, in the future, there will be these organizations that generate revenue. So you can imagine like many people, say a network of form a DAO, and they kind of get all together. They contract work. So maybe there's people that contract the podcast DAO. They say, hey, we would like people to promote this idea or to interview this type of person, or here's a gig. If you interview this person, you get 100 Ethereum, or 100 Ethereum would be a lot, but say some amount of Ethereum. And so they can kind of band together, get contracts as a group, and then distribute resources to maybe support one another with getting money for doing this. So you think of them almost as guilds.
What is the benefit over like getting together with fellow podcasters? Because you just mentioned that example. So getting together online with fellow podcasters, and if they do something nice, I PayPal them an amount of money. So what is the difference?
Right. So the difference would be that the payments are basically guaranteed. So once you actually do the thing, rather than, for example, say, have you ever tried to wire money to someone in a different part of the world? It's usually pretty difficult. There are a lot of fees, but you can do it directly. And then on top of that, you could set up a contract between you and that person that executes upon them actually completing the thing. And you could have oracles that essentially determine whether or not it happened. You could have councils that review things and make sure. So you don't have to worry, say, as someone doing the work, that you're not going to get paid, as long as you meet the requirements of this work. So there's already some stuff that's set up like this, like AI training for some of these algorithms. They use human reinforcement learning. And so they'll have, tons of people, say, in the Philippines or in different parts of the world that are training these algorithms and getting paid. And so if you are on kind of a credibly neutral financial system, then you can make it very simple to send micropayments to whoever based off of small bite-sized tasks. And so you can have these organizations that essentially are not mediated by any individual. Anyone can do work, and then you could pay into this organization to have any of these individuals complete a task. Yeah.
It's a stupid question. Is all this legal? Because you need to be a bank in order to be involved with transactions and money-like transactions. So do you need a license like a bank in order to do something like this?
No, yeah, that's not a stupid question. It's a great question. So there's a lot of standards that are being developed now for DAOs, where they're trying to come up with the proper way to regulate this, right? You could think of other ways in which this could develop to be nefarious, but the technology itself is just a tool. So like any tool, we just need to figure out
Yeah.
what are the right guardrails around it.
Yeah.
And so there have been many proposed kind of jurisdictions and legislations. There's some in the United States, for example, in Wyoming, they passed a DAO law. Now it's called DUNA, and they're innovating on this. There are groups in different parts of the world. There's one called MeDAO, which is what MoonDAO uses, and they also work to create proper DAO guardrails and ways of ensuring that the systems actually do benefit people. But it's very tricky because currently it's such a new technology that it's hard. You don't want to kill it by accident through too much regulation, but you kind of want to grow with it. And so there's a ton of legal scholars that are working and trying to figure out, okay, how does this fit into the big picture? It looks a lot like maybe unincorporated nonprofit associations. So many DAOs use that as their legal framework. But yeah, it's definitely not a dumb question. It's actually a very, very difficult question to figure out. How do you map the current world legal system to this new concept of DAOs?
Before we now venture into setting up a new society in outer space based on the blockchain, where is the blockchain right now? Is compared to the last hype cycle before the pandemic hit, I think it was, or was 22. So where is it? Who's using it next to nerd circles?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I smiled at first as I thought you asked, like, where is it? Because that's also a good question. Like, where is, because everywhere and nowhere, which makes it a very interesting jurisdiction for something like the moon, which is, the heritage of everyone on Earth. So, but yeah, it's a good question to also ask, okay, who is using this blockchain right now? Why, what's going on with it now? So I'd probably differentiate two major use cases of the blockchain right now. One is more speculative use. So this is like the Trump token, the
Melania token.
The Melania tokens, the meme coins. And so, this is essentially a casino. It's like gambling. You're just kind of trying to see if someone will buy the thing from you at a higher price than what you bought it for. But then there's actually some interesting stuff there under the hood too, to just kind of linger a little bit longer on these meme coins, is that what's interesting about them is that you can actually be on the other end of them, almost like a casino. So the casino usually has better odds than people playing in the casino. But through these decentralized exchanges, you can actually do market making for these tokens and receive some of the fees that otherwise normally, a hedge fund would be receiving or an exchange would be receiving. And so you can kind of start to disintermediate some of the various financial institutions that more or less have sit on the opposite side of the table from individuals and have been able to kind of collect fees and maybe rent seek. So now that sort of rent seeking is maybe distributed among more people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, these things are net positive for the world. I don't know if these meme coins, I think some of them are very interesting because they do have some community aspect and some value added component to it. Maybe there's a message, maybe there's something that connects people. It's a way of getting people to almost unite under in the most insane sort of direction. They look almost like religions to some, or cults. People feel like they identify with their coin, which is very interesting. But that's just one side of it, and we can bucket that on one end. And then the other is any sort of civilizational software is what I'd call it, that we use today, that is currently kind of maybe done by a small group of people that are then controlled by a governance system that is implemented through various legal documents and a court system behind it, and so all of those types of things that require humans to coordinate. So, for example, getting a license plate, getting an ID, a title, a deed for a house, debt, generally. All of these sort of accounting systems that we use in order to have point systems between people can be done through this network. And so I think that's going to be massively, I mean, they say, for example, that one of the biggest innovations of the 20th century was actually the joint stock company. And so the joint stock company was a way of distributing risk towards a new venture to create a business. And so this is what allowed for the sort of capital to come together in order to create the Industrial Revolution. And so what I think is going on right now is essentially that we are coming up with better forms of organization. We're going to come up with the joint stock company of the digital era, and this is what's going to fuel the information age. So this is going to be the key piece of innovation so that people can raise money at 10 times, 100 times the speed. They can open up a bank account. They can create a company in just a few clicks, and then immediately start coordinating with other people on an idea across the world, come up with a business plan, have revenue that is distributed between those individuals that's programmable on chain. So you don't have to fight about who shares what. It's all already been pre-programmed. And so I think this is going to be a massive innovation in our speed to collaborate and coordinate at the pace of the internet. The internet moves very quickly. And so we're going to need forms of organization that move just as quick.
And one such organization could be MoonDAO. So dive right into that. So you're merging crypto with space. Space is a hugely thriving industry, and perhaps crypto is the structural backbone of all of this. So was this the idea behind merging these worlds?
So I originally started exploring this idea on a local basis. So I was working at Google, and specifically I was working at Waymo on autonomous cars, and this was during the pandemic, and essentially I saw maybe a version of the world that was actually maybe a little bit scary, where all of these robots that are connected via the internet essentially are basically controlled by just one or a couple organizations that sit at the other side of the table from all of these individuals that are receiving these services. And I was kind of trying to think, okay, in what ways could you decentralize this type of network? Because this isn't just going to be in taxi services. We're going to see this in AI. We're going to see this in space. We're going to see this in all of these different projects that are hugely, where you need a ton of capital to be put in order to just be a player, in order to just have a seat at the table. And so what does the world look like where it takes, $500 billion to train a cutting edge AI system, or, $500 billion in order to create the sort of vehicles that you need in order to go to the moon or go to Mars and establish these outposts. And I thought that DAOs were probably the key ingredient. But I actually made a big mistake. So I worked on the local level first, and I realized that, hey, the adoption for this thing is actually extremely small. Even in San Francisco, in the Mission where I was living, which you might imagine San Francisco, okay, very, very tech forward. No, it's still very difficult to get people to wrap their head around this whole system. But instead, if you look at it from the opposite end, what are global challenges that many people from all over the world can get behind? Then all of a sudden your total addressable market is much, much larger, because there are pockets of people, individuals from all over the world that have already kind of come online into this new network. They already understand how these tools work. And so if you can tap into this global network, then, okay, all of a sudden it's actually very powerful. And so the first thing that we tried to apply this to, or I tried to apply this to with others, is to buy the US Constitution. So this was this is a crazy chapter
It got
where
me curious.
the US Constitution was actually going up for bid at Sotheby's. and it was going to be, a bunch of billionaires bidding on this, foundational document of democracy in
Foundational
the United
document. So
States.
like the constitutional document that is.
Yes, yeah. So
Wow.
there were 13 copies that were made originally for
Mm,
each of the 13 colonies. So they,
mm,
they wrote it out, they printed it, and then they distributed it to each of the colonies. And so this
mm,
is one of the 13, and it was the only one actually that was still in private hands. And
mm,
so the idea was, okay, well, let's try to, if this is really the technology that can bring democracy or democratize a lot of these systems will and make better governance systems, financial
mm.
systems, etc. Well, maybe we can apply it to try to beat a billionaire at
The
bidding
foundational
for the
document
Constitution.
for democracy. Yeah.
Yeah, and we raised almost $50 million and I'm not kidding. From the time that the idea came out, it was only a week until the bid. So $50 million sprang up out of nowhere, basically through a crowd raise that we organized. And so from
Where
there,
was you just where would you go with that kind of bid? Where would you go on, I don't know, Patreon, or where would you do something like that?
yeah, so we used a DAO. We used
Mm,
a crowdfunding mechanism for DAOs. It's called Juicebox, and yeah, it's pretty cool. Anyone can connect their wallet and then become a part of the organization. Put in some money. They receive a governance stake within the organization, and then from there, we went to Sotheby's. We created the proper legal framework in order to go there to have a bid. And we did all of this in just 1 week. It was really crazy,
huh.
but then we lost.
How
And the
did you
winner was
do all the
actually,
marketing? How did the marketing work? Because or did that sort of trickle down to all those places?
yeah, well, yeah, on the internet, everything moves super quickly. So, we posted tweets and got a bunch of people in the crypto Twitter world to say, hey, this would be fun. Let's try it. And it was kind of overnight. This tons of people, I think over 10,000 individuals put in money. Yeah.
So if I then put in, like, I don't know, 5K or whatnot, this would mean if the document got bought, I would own 5K shares, or not K shares, so but I would own the equivalent of 5K investments in shares or in whatever. Now, would it be shares? What would it be?
Yeah, it's a good question. So this is kind of something that the whole industry has been trying to get a handle on. Is
Mm,
do these tokens actually give you share of the underlying assets?
mm,
And if so, how does this fit into the current regulatory
mm,
framework of the SEC? And so
mm,
this is why you'll see a lot of people in the crypto world getting angry at how slow and how difficult it's been to register any of these tokens with the SEC or get the sort of proper guidance around how this is done. And this has actually pushed a lot of the industry towards the like meme coin side of things,
mm,
because with meme coins there is no underlying thing. It's kind of just
mm,
air. But that way, they're in this very strange. It's almost like you got the inverse of what you wanted. I guess this happens a
mm,
lot in government, right? You try to
mm.
regulate something, and then instead you get the opposite effect. So
Right.
by making it difficult for any of these tokens to register as a security with an underlying asset, it pushed a lot of the industry into this meme coin frenzy,
Mm,
governance
mm,
token mania, where you don't actually have the underlying fractional
mm,
share, which actually makes a ton of sense and should be how
mm,
these things work. But basically, in order to not count as this sort of security, everyone went the other direction, which
mm,
instead of protecting people as the SEC should be doing, they actually pushed the whole industry into a speculative mania with nothing underlying it,
mm, mm,
which is very unfortunate, actually.
mm,
So, in the case of the Constitution, the idea was you have governance over the document. So that meant you get to select where it is held. It's kind of like symbolic. You don't have the underlying asset of the Constitution, but ideally it would look like, then if you were ever to sell the Constitution or receive revenue from, maybe say there's a museum and there's a small entrance fee, so there's revenue to go see this document, then that could be split between all of the people that helped fund and make that. And I think that's the real power of these things. But the question is, how do you fit that into? Because obviously, if that were to work as a system, then that would take a huge chunk out of the Delaware LLC kind of standard way of doing things in the United States. It would route around a lot of the sort of the infrastructure that was built around the Delaware LLC. And so this would actually be a seismic shift in how the world works. But I don't think we're quite ready for that conversation yet. Yeah.
But the empire is struck back, so to say. You lost a bit, and who won it?
So the winner was Ken Griffin from Ken Griffin, he runs a hedge fund called Citadel. Sorry, I almost said Constitution. Citadel is, they do high frequency trading. They actually are on the opposite end of Robinhood. So to go a little bit deeper, because it's interesting. So Citadel is a market maker. They're a hedge fund, high frequency trading firm. And like I mentioned before, a lot of the interesting thing about these decentralized exchanges is that the kind of fee taking, market making side of things is opened up, and anyone can provide liquidity to any of these protocols. And so this is actually a massive risk to the current hedge funds, where they actually get to sit on the opposite end of the table with all of the traders on Robinhood or any of these other platforms that are basically generating fees that are getting routed over to Citadel. And so it's funny that, and I think it was actually a statement by the CEO of Citadel to kind of show his power, because here were 10,000 random people from the internet that tried to do this thing, and we actually increased the bid. It was going to be $10-20 million at auction. We increased it over $40 million, but he still bought it anyways. And I think it was to just kind of demonstrate dominance and show that, hey, actually, no, I'm still the big guy here.
Good, but you didn't let that discourage you. Let's go back to the origins of MoonDAO. What next? What happened after that?
Right. So after Constitution DAO, the lid kind of blew off the whole DAO. Basically there were thousands of people that were now looking for how could we apply this to other things? And an idea that came together was, what if we tried to send someone to space? So space is also something that is, extremely capital intensive. There are tons of, millionaires and billionaires that are sending themselves into space. What if we do it with just an everyday person? And we could, crowd raise and then basically run a random selection in order to figure out who gets to go. And so that was the idea. And we put it together, and then within a month raised over $8 million. And then basically the next month we got a contract with Blue Origin. The month after that, we selected the winner. So in a very small time span, we're able to execute on sending someone to space, which was fun, but also, I simplified it a lot. There's a lot under the hood, and it took a bunch of people to get it to happen. But
so yeah. Now, what is the difference now between sort of buying the Constitution and partly owning it, as opposed to putting someone on a rocket and sending them into space? With the Constitution, I can understand that it makes sense because I own something. But how about the guy or gal getting into space, having some fun, and coming back home again?
Yeah. So I would. So the thing that I would add is that these communities, so they go from just being a token to being kind of I hesitate to call it a company. It's something a little bit different. It's something in between a nation, a company, and a philosophy, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But essentially, what we were able to do with the funds, so we raised $8 million, right? but we spent a lot less to buy the seats. The rest of the funds were controlled by the community to fund projects. And so what we decided to do with the rest of the money is essentially run a grants program and an investment program in a bunch of other space projects that is controlled by the community. So we have a governance system, so anyone can write a proposal into our treasury and then receive funding in order to do a project. And so what the community does is essentially reviews these proposals. They figure out whether or not this is net positive for the organization. Is this going to bring more value into our organization than what it costs? And so you have basically almost like a decentralized venture capital type idea. So people come in with a proposal and then the community can fund that proposal. And we funded over 70 projects. We've had now a bit over 160 proposals that have come to us. And so we're trying to grow this treasury and as a community in order to further and accelerate this idea of a sustained human presence on the moon. So this is something that I think people all over the world can get behind. So it works really well for a DAO. If you think about what is going to be required on the surface of the moon, you'll probably have many autonomous systems where it makes no sense for them to kind of check back in constantly with a central server on Earth. There's a 3-second time delay back and forth. It would be much more efficient if any of these systems could work with one another on a peer-to-peer basis, where they can transact and work with one another directly. And then if you add on top of that a mechanism such that anyone on Earth can invest or have funding placed into these networks of autonomous systems that are on the moon, then you could have a way to connect an off-world economy with a real-world economy, such that many people on Earth benefit from this new sort of way of interacting between each of these systems. And so I think the moon is very interesting beyond that, because it's kind of a blank slate. So we can look at the moon and think bottoms up from first principles. What makes sense? Like, how would you register an object on the moon? You'd probably want to have it registered on a blockchain. How would you want to transact between these systems on the moon? It probably makes sense that you'd want to use some sort of decentralized coordination mechanism that doesn't require any central intermediary on the Earth. How do you enforce laws on the moon? Well, it probably makes sense that you'd want to use smart contracts. You'd want to use code, because this thing is way far out there, and it's already an autonomous system. So you can use this whole network in order to actually bootstrap a lunar economy. And so this, I think, is a really exciting idea for people, and me included, and a way that individuals can kind of start to get involved with a lunar economy, which is just beginning. So I think it's really exciting, but there's still tons and tons of challenges. So essentially, we've been able to take this idea of sending someone to space and then turn it into something much greater, where many individuals can contribute to making a lunar economy possible.
This is so fantastic and so fascinating. I'm having still a very hard time to wrap my head around it, but I'm trying hard. But what's in it for me as an investor? So is it to be part of history in the making, or is there something more in it? Is there a concrete financial value in it? If I don't know, if I invest in a lunar economy based on the blockchain or whatnot.
Right. Well, I guess I would say this to begin, right? Like any startup or any new business, there are tons and tons of risks involved, and it'll be, whether or not we deliver on these grandiose promises is who knows. This is extremely ambitious, extremely risky, and on top of that, I mean, we're using an entirely new financial framework. So it's just compounding tons and tons of risks. I would not recommend anyone to join MoonDAO thinking that, okay, I'm going to make a return on the investment or something like that. And in fact, kind of caution people to not do that. There are better places to do that. If you're looking for a return on investment. But what I would say is if you're someone that wants to get involved in the space ecosystem, what we're developing is essentially a network. So we are working with a bunch of different companies where we bring them on chain. So we literally go to companies like Intuitive Machines, and then we tell them about this network. We tell them about all of the people that want to be hired through this network. They want to maybe get paid through gigs. They want to use the marketplace so that they can buy and sell things online in this digital format. It's a method also for them to have some sort of marketing and connection with the space community. And so on one end, we try to bring many of these companies that are going to be players into this lunar ecosystem. And on the other end, we try to find individuals that are trying to break through to the industry and work with one another on projects that are funded by the community or on gigs that are coming from some of these companies. So essentially what we're trying to achieve is just almost like a supra, like a connective tissue between many different companies and many individuals that all share a common mission, a common purpose, where they want to play a part in the development of the moon. And so I'll try to elucidate this further because it kind of sounds like, okay, who is this crackpot guy who is this is a very crazy idea, but it's actually also something that so there's a program at DARPA called the Luna 10. It stood for it was a 10-year architecture study for the development of a lunar economy. And what they were able to achieve is essentially get all of the major players together in one room. So SpaceX and Blue Origin and many of these other startups, companies that are developing infrastructure for the moon, and sit them all down and say, okay, what are we building here? Who's building what? Where are you going to be? How are we going to coordinate this? And at the end of that meeting, someone stood up and said, well, it would be great if we could all coordinate our missions, if we had the ability to kind of upload some of our assets and then be able to coordinate with one another. But who would trust, a system that is built by any one of us? How can we actually coordinate effectively? And the answer that they came up with, and this wasn't us, we were sitting there at the table too, but we came in with a lunar timing protocol that we had developed with the community as a method for satellites to connect with one another and have kind of a time standard. But by the end of that meeting, we came out with that, with them asking us or the group in general for a blockchain-based system for coordination between all of these different entities on the moon. And so we were able to develop that as a grant that we received from this program, and started to work on a blockchain-based system for many of these companies to work with one another on the lunar surface. And so, it's kind of like, imagine our surprise where we're thinking, okay, well, we're going to have to do this maybe without the governments, but maybe we can all get together and make an impact on the lunar surface. But really, it's almost the institutions themselves, like DARPA, who created the internet, by the way, is realizing that the internet can play a very key role in connecting a lot of these efforts to accelerate the US space program, which is now mostly commercial, and try to, get there before any of our adversaries do. Whereas maybe we take an approach that we'd actually want to take the lead on values and then bring some of these quote unquote adversaries along with us for the ride, if they agree to sort of a standard of working with one another and sort of values around what we're doing that are enforced via these smart contracts. So
is it social software? I think you used that term a couple of minutes ago. Is it what you're delivering, what the MoonDAO delivers? Is that some kind of software to hold the hardware together?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It sounds a bit crazy sometimes to articulate it, but if you think about,
Mhm.
what is a society, what is a civilization, it's almost like the software protocols around
Mm.
what humans are doing. So we have certain cultural norms, we have language, for example. This is, these are software, it's information that we use in order to coordinate with one another effectively. And these hardware systems need the same thing. And they use these communication links via the internet. We go all the way to space, we go back. And the blockchain essentially is this new like world computer. It's a way for people from all over the world to achieve consensus on reality, on what is actually happening, and to do so without any sort of third party intermediary. And so this actually maps on pretty naturally to a lot of what humans do already. But I think that we'll only be able to do this in a more effective manner that is less prone to corruption, because any sort of power that you give to a small group of individuals, in the fullness of time, will eventually become corrupted. And so as we're talking about, these very ambitious goals of having a base on the moon, these extremely capital intensive projects where there's a lot of money and power on the line, wouldn't it be great if we could somehow, put this in the hands of as many people as possible so that we kind of
Interesting.
control it through democracy?
Tell me again, you mentioned already through the DARPA example that SpaceX and Blue Origin actually support this kind of framework, this kind of social software. I'm just wondering why both are not more vocal about anything in this direction. Because like wherever Elon casts his eyes, I have never heard him mention something like this before. Is there a reason? Or maybe I just misheard?
Well, so they were all performers, or they were all a part of that study, the 10-year study.
Mhm.
And so this idea is kind of being developed as we speak. There's another group or initiative that I think is very, very interesting, called the Lunar Development Cooperative. And so this is
Mhm.
spearheaded by Michael Castle-Miller, which you should definitely have here on this
Mhm.
podcast. And what he's aiming to do is essentially create an infrastructure provider on the moon that counts many of these commercial companies as partners, as well as governments, such that they can co-invest in essential infrastructure, for example, landing pads
Mhm.
that many of these companies will need to use, and then develop a framework around this so that it can be done in a way that adds value to all these companies. So imagine, you are a lunar landing company. You're not going to want to develop the landing pads yourselves. You'll want to join a coalition of companies that have already put in money in order to create some of these ports. And so this looks kind of like a special economic zone. And Michael Castle Miller he's done, I think, over 30 special economic zones, maybe more. I might not have the number right, but he's kind of one of the leading figures in developing these. And so the hope is that essentially, if you have an entity that can pool in funding from SpaceX, from Blue Origin, from the United States,
Mm.
from Germany, from Saudi Arabia, from all kinds of different players all over the world, to develop some of the key pieces of infrastructure needed, then you start to develop a framework for all of these organizations to work with one another. Because SpaceX is more focused on Mars, but they also have pretty massive contracts with NASA to develop components of Artemis. And so, they're already working within a framework of coordinating with other companies. And obviously, they're going to need to continue to do so. So I think any of these companies like Blue Origin and SpaceX, they want to serve a market. And so that market will need to be developed through all of these companies coming to some sort of agreements with one another in order to establish the ability to coordinate with one another on the moon. So I think it's not so much that they're resistant to the idea. It's just that we haven't even we're just barely putting landers on the moon again. In the next 5-10 years, I think we'll start to see some infrastructure developed. There'll be tier one infrastructure that's developed here on the Earth, and then tier two infrastructure that's developed into this lunar space, and then eventually on the surface of the moon. But right now, it's only starting to get off of the ground, these conversations. And so it's not like a pressing issue for Elon to weigh in on,
It all sounds, and you already used that term, guilds. It sounds like a collection of guilds getting together. So, for example, imagine you have the Lunar Landing Pad Guild, and they would come together and say, hey, we need a bunch of more pads. We rent them out to Blue Origin, whoever. So who guarantees the quality of that infrastructure? So who guarantees that I'm not building the cheapest of the landing pads and could cause harm for the entire moon colony?
Right. Yeah. So that's a great question. So I think that we basically lean on our entire history of government and figuring out how to get contractors to actually deliver on the things that they say at the price that they say. And so, I think right now that's a big question on the mind for the Doge folks. So Elon's already going in and getting rid of the cost plus contracting and trying to make more competitive bids and trying to reduce the bloat of government in general. I think that we'll probably bring a lot of these problems with us on the lunar surface too. But at the very least, we might have more efficient mechanisms of deploying capital via the blockchain, more transparent mechanisms where it's auditable by anyone, so they can see exactly how much everyone is receiving. Maybe if you're contracting for one company to make landing pad A, you should probably have a second company that's making landing pad B, and then have them compete between the two of them, so that they're trying to increase the how much people are using their landing pads and paying them for it, and then maybe try to turn that into their own business. But the people that help put in money originally can sit on that cap table, receive fees, receive revenue for other people using that infrastructure, and the Lunar Development Cooperative can help control and maintain that, and continue to invest in those landing pads as they deteriorate, etc.
And each member of a sub blockchain based community has equal votes to like the rest of his peer, or is there a hierarchy? So if we stick to that landing pad example, so who votes for who builds the landing pad? Is this by the individual members of that quote unquote guild, or is this represented by someone with a singular vote?
Right. So, I mean, that is a great question, and I'm not going to say we have an answer yet, because we need buy-in from all of the individuals, and it'll be up to each of them to kind of come up with a consensus around how the governance works. But I can tell you about how MoonDAO's governance works, which is pretty interesting. So we use various mechanisms in order to kind of ensure the decentralization of power. And this is actually a very, very difficult thing to achieve. And this is our best estimate right now, like how to achieve it as a DAO. So we've modeled it after the US. So we have 3 branches of governance. We have a token weighted house. So this is based off of the tokens that are in the DAO. You actually have the square root of them. So imagine if you were to own over 50% of these tokens, right? Then the vote is no longer it's not viable. There's research and literature done in governance that has found that if you do one person, one vote, this is actually not optimal. People that have invested more than others, are basically not going to want to participate in a one for one thing, because they're putting in way more and then getting a very small voice within it. But then on the other end of things, if it's just token weighted, then someone can control the whole thing. They could acquire more than a certain amount. So, there are other ways of limiting that. Maybe you have a cap that's like 10% or something like that, but then it kind of, there's a non-discrete limit, and people might want to game it by spreading their voting power between multiple entities. And so what we use is quadratic voting, which is you take the square root of everyone's stake. And so you actually have to stake it. You have to lock those tokens in for a period of time too. Because another thing you want to avoid is essentially speculation done via your governance. So there's these things, and we're getting into maybe the weeds a little bit, but there's these things called flash loans in blockchain where you can actually, in the same block, you can borrow, say $1 billion, vote on a proposal, and then return back the money immediately. And so you pay. You essentially can do these speculative attacks on DAO governance, and many DAOs have been hacked in that way. So we require a locking period for some amount of time in order to develop a stake. And then on top of that, we have another house, which is the Senate, and these are individuals that are sourced from the community that have led different projects within the community. And essentially they're representative, that they vote them in via the governance. And these individuals review proposals before they go up to vote. They ensure that they're constitutional. They can reject. They're kind of like the legislative branch. They can create a new idea, a new proposal, and then it needs to be approved by the token holders. And then there's an executive branch that actually takes whatever was approved by the token holders and then executes on it and implements it on chain. So this is our system. I know that wasn't exactly what you asked, but you asked a bigger question, is how all of these companies are going to coordinate with one another. We have our version that works at a smaller scale. We don't know if this is going to be something that scales for everyone, but it's still a very active bit of research, DAO governance, and so. And I think we're pretty proud of what we were able to come up with, but there's still going to be a lot of new ideas developed.
How many people are actually contributing to this? By the way, this reminds me of what the constitutional the founding fathers, so to say, had to go through when writing that constitution to take any kind of situation into account and ensure that this constitution holds against any kind of attack or messing with. So this is pretty much the 21st century version of this kind of work the founding fathers of the United States did. It's sort of similar to me. So how many contributing members are currently working on that kind of blockchain constitution for the DAO, the MoonDAO?
Well, the Constitution itself is already, so we've put it together, and we've implemented pretty major portions of it. We're still working on some of the smart contracts around it, but I don't know how many people have contributed to the Constitution itself. It's probably been over 50 over the lifetime of the document, and that includes anything from like leaving a comment that then eventually gets implemented. To our original calls. We actually formulated this constitution via Discord calls with the community, and we'd have 20 people weighing in and giving ideas about how things are gonna work and what we're gonna do, and they're very lengthy, as you can imagine. But it's cool because now you can also see a living history of that document over time and all the amendments that we've made, all the mistakes that we've made, things that we've learned, ways that we've adapted it. Actually, the more higher entropy document, apart from the Constitution, is our incentive mechanism. So this is like how money flows within the organization, and the systems around that. And that's a tougher one because once you start, voting is one thing. People can feel very emotional about voting, definitely. But money, that's money you need to really get right, because people will get really mad if the system of the decentralized finances that we have breaks or gets corrupted, or or if someone did work and then they don't get paid. So this has been something that we've been working on quite a bit. Yeah.
Fantastic. Considering the shift from nation state authority in the space industry to private players like the ones you mentioned today and that we're seeing on a global scale these days. And on the other end, the social contracts, the social software being taken over by individuals assembling over the internet sort of in the most democratic of ways. Is this the end of nation states? What we're seeing here, is this all dissolving into an essentially new form of how we do things on Earth as a society?
So there's a really good book. It's difficult for anyone to speculate on the future of the world and how technology is going to impact it and get it right. But this book actually did. So this book actually got it right. They started in the 90s. So the book is called The Sovereign Individual, and it basically predicts the impact of the microprocessor and how it's going to affect, the nations and governments and banks around the world. And essentially their core thesis was that encryption is going to have a revolutionary effect on the world, because people are going to be able to encrypt their business information. They're going to be able to interact with one another in a peer-to-peer manner without any government or bank in between. And essentially this means the end of, and it's crazy, but the end of taxation, because in order to have taxation, you need to have surveillance. And so if the governments can no longer surveil people, then they can do business without having them in between. And so this isn't, this isn't necessarily the world that I want. I want to make that distinction. It's just the world that is possible. So as we move into,
No, where is the welfare state in all of this? Who builds infrastructure? Who builds roads? Who is taking care of pensions and whatnot?
Right. So essentially what the book predicts is the end of welfare states and a return to, so the way that it and these aren't my theses. This is just, I'm just regurgitating the book. It basically draws a kind of path through history where the social contract is essentially dictated by offensive capabilities versus defensive capabilities of military might. So, for example, there have been periods in history where defensive capabilities were greater than offensive capabilities. And what this meant is there was a larger return to private ownership of private property. Things became more feudal. So this was like Middle Ages in Europe versus other periods in Europe. For example, during the Roman Empire, where there was an advantage from the offensive side, so it's much easier to kind of conquer others and centralize power. And so the book lays this out, and it's all pretty interesting. But essentially, what it's saying is that we're going into a phase of history where defensive capabilities are going to be much greater. So essentially, it's going to be much more difficult for a bank or government to seize the assets of any individual because they can make essentially like virtual organizations that they can turn on or off at a click of a button. They could change their jurisdictions. It could be totally anonymous. All of these different ways that they can essentially evade the sort of capture by any one of these nations. And again, this isn't the world that I want necessarily. It's just kind of where the book kind of leads, and it's interesting to say the least. It draws it also predicts a massive increase in violence because another thing the state does is a monopoly on violence. So it's not all, so some of this isn't so it might not be that great, but the capitalists will make a lot of money.
This is really interesting because this curves back to the great debate between Hobbes and Rousseau. And what you're mentioning is that the book predicts the Hobbesian understanding of society, that we humans are essentially wolves against one another, and we can only be kept in check by a social contract we have to adhere to. Without the social contract, that is, without a constitution, without a state, we would rip ourselves apart. Is this what the book is predicting?
So the book. So okay, I guess I'd lay it out this way. In a world where you can move anywhere, so physically, or incorporate anywhere, or do your business transactions anywhere, the world becomes much more. I think I haven't said this word. I might be pronouncing it wrong. Agoric. So essentially, you only enter into contracts willfully. You enter into the types of contracts that actually benefit you versus a contract that is imposed on you. For example, say if you're a U.S. citizen, it doesn't matter where you live, you still get taxed by the U.S. It's one of the few nations that does that. And in a world where there's an increased amount of liberty for people to travel to whichever sort of jurisdiction they want to, or be a part of whatever sort of society that benefits them the most, then then maybe this doesn't make as much sense anymore. And so the power of the governments, of the traditional governments, or the book predicts, is going to be much more diminished. But overall, people will be able to kind of choose the sort of societies that they want to be a part of. So if you want to choose to be a part of a society that, maybe redistributes wealth in a way that, supports people that can't generate the level of income in order to sustain themselves, and take care of the elderly, do all of these things that we kind of agree as civilized individuals that, yes, actually some amount of taxes does make sense in order to support the less fortunate people that, can't produce economic output in the market to sustain themselves. We'll probably want to enter into those contracts.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. No, we probably will want to be a part of those societies, but I think that we'll see basically a reconstruction of that, and it'll probably be a tumultuous period. While the new systems and old systems kind of reconfigure themselves.
Pablo, let's just assume that you're with the MoonDAO, you're coming up with the perfect contract and for any walk of moon life. How can you make sure that someone is listening at the tables of the big players who are setting up that multinational infrastructure, the Chinese, the Americans, the Europeans, India, whoever is part of a future dwelling on the moon? How can you make sure they're listening? How can you make sure that the MoonDAO is at the table, as even discussed? Because this is a huge power game that is unfolding on the moon in outer space. So how can you make sure that people at the table who are then setting up that lunar infrastructure are listening to you? So suppose you're coming up with the perfect, next to perfect constitution, next to perfect social software for a lunar habitation. How can you make sure that the Chinese, the Americans, the Europeans, India, whoever is at the table, are listening to you? Because this is a huge power game for supremacy on the moon. Why should they have you at the table? And should want you at the table?
Yeah. Yeah. So the way that I usually frame this is that it essentially, like, you want math to be the one that is arbitrating between each of these nations. You want to have international law is very difficult, but if you're able to program the outcomes exactly through code and math, then this makes it easier to come to an agreement. It's universal language, and they're kind of universal things that a lot of people can mostly agree on. Fair terms and ways that you can construct agreements between groups. And so I'd say the one and only unique idea that MoonDAO brings to the table between all of these kind of warring interests is that whatever you guys agree, maybe there's some aspects of that we can program in on a very predictable, deterministic system. And I think that might be agreeable to both ends. That way there's, it's less messy loose ends. But ultimately, I don't think you can construct purely just a code-based system. You will need to have individuals that are sitting on different councils and boards, and that ideally represent the interests of many of these organizations, and so maybe elements of the governance can be done via the smart contract, but that can only get you so far as to maybe elect some individuals that then have to use their own human judgment in arbitrating or negotiating with others. And so, yeah, I would say that that would be why they would want, maybe not me, but someone like me that can help take some of these concepts and put it into hard code.
Fantastic. Or meeting in Gather Town, and because this would be the the assembly hall of the future in the first place.
Right.
Pablo, would you be one of those folks? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, people are generally very receptive to these ideas, though. But we'll see, whether or not they actually follow through.
Yeah,
it's like you can invite people to the dinner party, but then when it comes time to actually show up, maybe there are other things that they have to go do. So,
Pablo, would you a personal question? Would you want to go to space yourself if the call came?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's the greatest adventure that we can partake in as a human on Earth right now. I mean, I think we're living in the most exciting times in human history, and the fact that it's actually possible for you or I to go to space and explore. I mean, I don't think there's anything more romantic and I think it also makes you want to be a better person. Like, I want to be healthy so I can go to space. I want to stay sharp so that sometime, if that opportunity arises, then, maybe I could go.
There's a question attached to that question, and that is, I keep asking that question, by the way, to any of our guests. And that question is, so let's maybe not go to the moon, because this is just a 3 to 5 day journey. Let's suppose we're going to Mars, which is a little longer. So after the initial couple of weeks of excitement, things can get quite boring. So what kind of one piece of music would you not want to miss on your personal Pablo Goes to Mars playlist? And the reason is we have a playlist for the aspiring space traveler.
Since I Left You by the Avalanches. I think that would be a good one to add in there.
Good. Haven't heard of that one, so I'm looking forward to listening.
Yeah. Well, it's cool because they sample a bunch of sounds from different parts of the world, and
great.
It's an Australian band. You'll love them. Yeah.
Cool. Last question, Pablo. This is the Space Cafe podcast, virtual coffee place. Now and then, to energize yourself, you have yourself an espresso to energize your body. Now I challenge you to share an espresso for the mind with me, to energize our minds, our listeners' minds. What espresso, what shot of inspiration would you want to share with me, with the audiences, no matter the topic?
I actually cheated because I knew that you'd ask this question, and so I was trying to come up with answers for a while, and I couldn't come up with any, and I just said I'll just procrastinate and try to come up with one on the spot. So here's my best. Well, I think that something that was helpful for me, that I think could be helpful for others, is there's a book called the Whole Earth Catalog, and that is an espresso for the mind. Every it's an old book. and it's almost like an index of a bunch of interesting ideas. And within that, there's one passage called the 4 Lies of Money. And I think everyone should read this because it's really interesting. I don't know if I could recite by heart the name of the 4, but the takeaway lesson is essentially that money is a tool, but we can't fall in love with the money itself. The money itself is nothing. It doesn't actually give you the things that you want. At the end of the day, the reasons that people give themselves for why they want to accumulate money and hoard it and focus their lives around money are mostly all falsehoods. And I won't butcher the rest of it myself. I just recommend people go out and try and seek it. It's called the 4 Lies of Money, and in the Whole Earth catalog. Yeah.
Fantastic. Pablo Moncada, thank you so much for taking the time. It was fantastic.
Thank you, Marcus. Yeah.
The way we explore space is changing. For the first time in history, technology allows us to think beyond borders, not just national borders, but planetary ones. MoonDAO isn't just an experiment in governance. It's a preview of what comes next. A world where space isn't just for the privileged few, but for the many who dare to dream it differently. But the question remains, though, can decentralization work at the scales of space? Will DAOs become the foundation of off-world societies, or will power in the end always consolidate? One thing is certain: the moon, Mars, and beyond are not just empty frontiers. They're blank slates, and what we write on them now will define the future of humanity in space in the future. Want to dig deeper? Check out MoonDAO at moondao.com and follow the latest developments in decentralized space exploration. And as always, if you loved this episode, this conversation, share it with a fellow space explorer. Subscribe to the Space Cafe podcast and leave us a review. It helps us reach more cosmic thinkers just like you. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and SpaceWatch.Global. Join the conversation on LinkedIn and X. And until next time, my friends, keep looking up, keep questioning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what is possible. This is the time. Bye-bye.